There was no conversation. There was only the sound of a heavy military boot grinding against concrete, and the sickening crunch of my own metacarpals snapping. I lay on the oil-stained floor of the Vanguard Architecture parking garage, staring up at the man who raised me. In the fluorescent light, he didn't look like a father. He looked like a demolition crew. He lifted his boot again, aiming for my dominant right hand, the hand that drew skyscrapers. "If you won't use these hands to sign the loan for your brother," he screamed, saliva hitting my cheek, "then you won't use them at all." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't scream when his truck peeled out of the garage. Screaming expends energy, and I had none to waste. My right hand was a ruin of crushed bone and swelling flesh, throbbing in time with my heartbeat, but my mind had already detached. It hovered somewhere above the concrete, cool and observant, assessing the damage like a site inspector, noting a critical structural failure. With my left hand, my non-dominant hand, shaking but functional, I pulled my phone from my pocket, I bypassed the contact from my mother, I ignored the names of my friends, I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Assault, I said. My voice sounded strange, hollow, metallic. Parking garage at Vanguard Architecture. I need an ambulance and a police unit. Are you safe now, ma'am? The perpetrator has fled the scene. Perpetrator, not dad, not my father. The man who had just stomped on my livelihood had ceased to be apparent the moment his heel connected with my knuckles. He was now just a liability. The ambulance ride was a blur of neon lights and the smell of antiseptic, but I refused the sedative the paramedic offered. "I need to be lucid," I told him. While he strapped my arm to a board, I unlocked my phone again. I navigated to my contacts, the Brennan family. My thumb hovered over the delete button. For 26 years, that group chat had been a source of constant anxiety, guilt, trips about Sunday dinners, passive-aggressive comments about my fancy job, demands for money disguised as emergencies. I pressed delete, then block. I went down the list. Mom, block. Joshua, block. Dad, block. It didn't feel like anger. It felt like cleaning a virus off a hard drive. Efficient, necessary, silent. At the hospital, the ER doctor was a woman with kind, tired eyes and a clipboard. She gently cut away my sleeve, revealing the purple and black swelling that extended up my forearm. She hissed a breath through her teeth. "Honey," she said softly, "did you fall? Was this an accident?" She was giving me the out. The standard social script, where we pretend families don't break each other's bones. My gaze fell to the ruin of my hand, the instrument of my creation, the hand that had drawn the specs for the new municipal library, the hand that paid my mortgage, the hand that had written checks to cover my brother's rent for 3 years. "No," I said. The word was hard and flat. It wasn't an accident, it was attempted maiming. The doctor froze. Maiming? My father did this. I continued, reciting the facts as if reading a blueprint. He did it because I refused to co-sign a fraudulent loan for my brother. He targeted my dominant hand specifically to impact my ability to work. This was a calculated strike to enforce financial compliance. I met her gaze with the professional detachment I usually reserved for contractors. I don't need a social worker. I don't need a chaplain. I need a police officer with a notepad. And I need you to document every fracture in extreme detail. Can you do that? The doctor's pity vanished, replaced by professional respect. She nodded once. I can do that. Good. I laid my head back against the pillow. The pain was screaming now, a white-hot noise in my nervous system, but I shoved it into a soundproof room in the back of my mind. There would be time for pain later. Right now, I had a case to build. Detective Morris entered the hospital room 2 hours later. She was a woman built of sharp angles and skeptical eyes, holding a notepad like a weapon. She pulled up a chair beside my bed, looking at the cast that now encased my right arm up to the elbow. "Your father is in custody," she said, her voice neutral. "He claims this was a family dispute that got out of hand. He says you provoked him by mocking his financial situation. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Instead, I used my left hand to unlock my phone and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd named the sinkhole. It wasn't a dispute, detective, I said. It was an audit. I turned the screen toward her. For the last 5 years, I have tracked every single cent my parents have poured into my brother Joshua. Rent payments for apartments he trashed. Legal fees for DUIs he didn't learn from. Investments in business ideas that vanished over a weekend. I pointed to the total at the bottom of the screen. $56,400, I read aloud. That is the cost of my brother's existence to date. My parents don't have savings. They don't have retirement funds. They have Joshua. Morris looked at the numbers, her eyebrows knitting together. And this is why he attacked you? Because you showed him this? No, I corrected. He attacked me because he wanted to add another $20,000 to the pile. I explained the demand. Joshua had decided he was a crypto entrepreneur. He needed $20,000 for seed capital. My father, whose credit was already ruined from bailing Joshua out of his last mess, couldn't secure the loan. So he turned to the only asset he had left, me. He brought the loan papers to my office parking garage. I said, the memory tasting like bile. He didn't ask me to sign. He ordered me. He said it was my duty, that I was hoarding my success while my brother starved. Morris sighed, closing her notebook for a moment. I see this a lot. The parents protect the one who fails and punish the one who succeeds. But to break your hand, it's not just protection. Detective, I said, and this was the truth that had taken me years to understand. My parents didn't just spoil Joshua, they crippled him. I took a breath, feeling the ache in my ribs. They created a factory of learned helplessness. They didn't raise a son, they raised a pet. By never letting him fail, by never letting him feel the consequences of his own stupidity, they ensured he could never succeed. His incompetence isn't a bug in the system, it's the main feature. They need him to be needy so they can feel like parents, and they need me to be the bank so they can feel like providers. I gestured to my broken hand. Today, I closed the bank. I refused to sign. I told him that I wouldn't pay for another brick in the monument to Joshua's failure. And that's when he snapped. He didn't hit me because he was angry. He hit me because I broke the machine. Detective Morris opened her notebook again, her pen moving fast. And you're willing to testify to all of this? The financial coercion, the history? Detective, I said, leaning back against the sterile pillows. I'm not just testifying, I'm providing the receipts. The first attempt at a settlement arrived the next morning, not through a lawyer, but on my doormat. It was a personal check for $6,000 clipped to a handwritten note on floral stationery. For your medical bills. Drop the charges. Don't ruin Joshua's future. I stared at the paper. $6,000. That was their valuation of my safety. It was less than the cost of the structural steel I ordered for a single balcony. I didn't touch the check with my bare hand. I used a pair of tweezers to place it inside a plastic evidence bag. I labeled it Exhibit D, Attempted Bribery. They were trying to patch a load-bearing crack with Scotch tape, and they expected me to be grateful for the effort. I went to work. Vanguard architecture was my sanctuary, a place of clean lines, hushed tones, and absolute order. I was managing the schematics for the new municipal library with my left hand, my right arm encased in a rigid white cast. The cast felt heavy, like a piece of armor I hadn't chosen but now refused to take off. At 10 o'clock, the silence of the lobby shattered. I heard her before I saw her, my mother's voice shrill and panicked, echoing off the polished marble walls. I am her mother! You cannot stop me! I walked to the glass railing of the mezzanine. Michelle was down there, red-faced, arguing with the security guard. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted from desperation to a terrifying, self-righteous fury. Hannah! She screamed, pointing a finger at me. Get down here! How dare you! How dare you put your father in a cage? The entire firm stopped. Partners looked out of their offices. Junior associates froze over their drafting tables. My mother was dragging the chaotic, messy dysfunction of my private life into the pristine geometry of my career. I walked down the stairs. I didn't run. I moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a site inspector finding a violation. "You need to leave, Michelle," I said. I didn't call her mom. "You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" she choked out, rushing toward me. "I gave birth to you, you ungrateful, selfish little—" She swung. It wasn't a calculated strike like my father's, it was a frantic, emotional lash-out. Her palm connected hard with my left cheek. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. Security tackled her a second later, pinning her arms behind her back. But the damage was done. My face stung, but my resolve solidified into something unbreakable. She hadn't just slapped her daughter. She had assaulted a senior architect in her place of business. She had just handed me the final permit I needed for demolition. "Call the police," I told the guard, "and add this to the file." An hour later, I was sitting in the office of Rebecca Stone. She was known in legal circles as the Shredder, a woman who didn't just win cases. She dismantled the opposition. I placed the evidence bag with the check on her mahogany desk. Then I pointed to the red mark fading on my cheek. "I don't want a protective order," I said. "I want a forensic audit of their entire lives." Rebecca looked at the check, then at my cast. She smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator, seeing wounded prey. "We aren't just going to defend you, Hannah. We are going to subpoena everything. Bank records, phone logs, text messages going back 5 years. If they bought a pack of gum with money that should have been yours, I want to know about it." I looked out the window at the city skyline. I used to build things, but now, for the first time in my life, I was ready to swing the wrecking ball. "Burn it down," I said. "Burn it all down." In the legal world, they call the weeks before a trial discovery. In my line of work, we call it excavation. It is the process of digging up the earth to see what lies beneath the surface before you pour a foundation. And just like on a construction site, you almost always find something rotting in the dirt. 2 weeks into the proceedings, the police executed a warrant to seize electronic devices from my parents' home. They took my father's laptop, my mother's tablet, and my brother's smartphone. Rebecca Stone called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. The blinds were drawn, and a large monitor on the wall was glowing blue. "You need to see this," Rebecca said. Her voice lacked its usual shark-like amusement. It was flat, grave. She pointed to the screen. "We found a video file on Joshua's cloud account. It was recorded on the day of the assault. Time-stamped 2 minutes before your 911 call." I frowned. There were no security cameras in that corner of the garage. "That's why my father chose it." "It wasn't a security camera," Rebecca said. She clicked the mouse. The screen flickered to life. The footage was shaky, filmed vertically, framed by the dark upholstery of a car interior. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was the view from the back seat of my father's truck. My stomach dropped. Joshua hadn't been at home waiting for the money. He had been there. He had been sitting in the back seat, behind tinted windows, watching the whole time. On the screen, I saw my father get out of the driver's seat. I saw myself walking toward the truck. I heard the muffled sound of shouting. "Turn up the volume," I whispered. Rebecca adjusted the levels. The audio from inside the cab was crystal clear. But it wasn't my father screaming that turned my blood to ice. It was the sound of my brother breathing. Heavy, excited breaths. Then he spoke. He wasn't whispering for my father to stop. He wasn't reaching for the door handle to help his sister. He was zooming in. "Go on, Dad," Joshua whispered on the recording, his voice thick with adrenaline. "Make it look real. Hit her." On the screen, my father's boot connected with my hand. I flinched, even safe in the lawyer's office. "Oh, that's it," Joshua chuckled darkly. "That is the money shot right there." The video ended abruptly as he lowered the phone, presumably to hide it before my father got back in the car. Silence filled the room, a heavy, suffocating silence. I stared at the black screen. All my life, I had believed the narrative my parents sold me, that Joshua was weak, that he was a fragile, golden bird who needed protection from the harsh world. I thought they spoiled him because they loved him too much. But that was a lie. He wasn't filming it to help you, Rebecca said softly, reading the realization on my face. And he wasn't filming it to protect your father. No, I said, the word tasting like ash. He was filming it for insurance. It was the receipt. The sociopath's receipt. Joshua knew that if he had video evidence of his father committing a felony, he would never have to ask for money again. He wouldn't need loans. He wouldn't need begging. He could just threaten to send that video to the police or my father's military pension board. My parents had spent 20 years sacrificing me to feed their son, convinced they were protecting a vulnerable child. But they hadn't raised a child. They had raised a viper. And he had been sitting in the tall grass of the back seat, waiting for the perfect moment to sink his fangs into the hand that fed him. I looked at Rebecca. For the first time since the attack, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a prosecutor holding a smoking gun. He's not a witness, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He's an accomplice. And he's an extortionist. Yes, Rebecca agreed, leaning back in her chair. This video doesn't just convict your father, Hannah. It destroys the entire family myth. They think they're a unit fighting against you. Wait until your father sees this. I stood up. My broken hand throbbed, but it felt different now. It wasn't just an injury. It was the bait that had caught the snake. When do we show them? I asked. Rebecca smiled, and this time it was terrifying. We save it for the cross-examination. The trial lasted 3 days, but the demolition took only 3 minutes. That was the length of the video file Rebecca played for the jury. My father's defense attorney had spent the morning trying to shore up a collapsing structure. He painted Robert as a stress provider, a man pushed to the brink by an ungrateful daughter who refused to help her struggling family. He called it a tragic lapse in judgment. He tried to frame the assault as a singular crack in an otherwise solid foundation. Then, Rebecca stood up. She didn't offer an opening statement. She simply tendered Exhibit G into evidence and pressed play. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The shaky, vertical footage from the back seat of the truck filled the room, the sound of my father's heavy breathing, the view of him exiting the vehicle, and then the voice of the cameraman. Go on, Dad. Make it look real. In the defendant's chair, my father froze. He hadn't seen this. Rebecca had saved it for the ambush. He stared at the screen, watching himself stomp on my hand, and then hearing his beloved son, his golden boy, chuckle and whisper, "That's money right there." Robert slowly turned his head toward the gallery. He looked at Joshua. For 28 years, Robert had sacrificed his retirement, his credit score, and his daughter to protect that boy. And in that moment, he realized he hadn't raised a son. He had raised a parasite that was currently feeding on him. Joshua refused to meet his eyes, shrinking into his seat like a rat caught in a flashlight beam. The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a building imploding the split second after the charges blow before the dust settles. Judge Hamilton was a woman who presided over her court, like a site inspector condemning a hazard. She didn't look at the lawyers. She looked directly at my father. "Mr. Brennan, stand up," she ordered. He stood. He looked smaller now. The terrifying demolition crew I remembered was gone, replaced by an old man standing in the rubble of his own life. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years, Judge Hamilton said, her voice echoing off the wood paneling. "I have seen crimes of passion. I have seen crimes of desperation. But I have rarely seen a crime of such calculated malice. You did not just assault your daughter. You attempted to destroy her utility. You tried to break her hands because they were the only part of her you valued her ability to provide capital." She shifted her gaze to the gallery, landing briefly on my mother and Joshua. This court rejects the defense that this was a family dispute. This was not a family. This was a criminal enterprise built on coercion and violence. And today, we are condemning the property. She looked back at my father. On the charge of aggravated assault with intent to maim, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10. My mother screamed. It was a raw, theatrical sound, but nobody moved to comfort her. Additionally, the judge continued, her voice cutting through the noise. I am issuing a lifetime restraining order. You are to have no contact with the victim, Hannah Brennan, not by phone, not by mail, and certainly not through third parties. She turned to the bailiff. Take him into custody. As the bailiffs moved in, snapping handcuffs onto the wrists that had broken mine, my father didn't look at me. He looked at Joshua. His face wasn't filled with sadness. It was filled with the terrifying clarity of a man who realizes he has been eaten alive by his own creation. Police officers moved into the gallery, arresting Joshua on the spot for extortion and accessory to assault based on the video evidence. My mother was sobbing, pulling at the officers, watching her entire world dissolve. I stood by the prosecution table. My cast was still heavy on my arm, but my chest felt light. I didn't smile, I didn't cheer, I just watched. I was the architect of this moment. I had drawn the plans, poured the concrete, and signed the permits. And as the Brennan family collapsed into a pile of dust and handcuffs, I felt the only emotion that mattered. Structure, stability, and peace. 3 years after the sentencing, I stood on the sidewalk in front of a building that used to be a derelict warehouse. Now, it was a fortress of glass, steel, and light. We called it the Sanctuary. It was my first pro bono project as a partner at Vanguard. I had designed every square inch of it myself, drawing the plans with a hand that still ached when it rained, but never shook when it mattered. It was a shelter for domestic violence survivors. But it didn't look like a shelter. It didn't look like a place for victims. It looked like a citadel. I designed it to be impenetrable from the outside, but filled with light on the inside. A place where you could rebuild your foundation without fear of demolition. I cut the ribbon with my right hand. There is a faint white line running across my knuckles, a scar where the bone had shattered. It serves as a reminder, not of the pain, but of the structural stress test I had survived. People often ask me if I'm happy now that justice has been served. They assume that sending my father to prison and watching my mother and brother face the consequences felt like a victory parade. They want to hear that I feel triumphant. The truth is quieter than that. There is a concept in medicine called the phantom limb. It's when an amputee still feels the sensation of the arm or leg that has been removed. They feel an itch on a foot that isn't there. They try to step on a leg that is gone. Cutting off your family is a spiritual amputation. You know it was necessary, you know the limb was gangrenous, rotting, and poisoning the rest of the body. You know that if you hadn't cut it off, the infection would have killed you. But that doesn't mean you don't feel the absence. I feel it on Christmas morning when my phone doesn't ring. I feel it on Sundays when I walk past families having brunch. I feel the silence where the chaos used to be. For a long time, I mistook that silence for loneliness. But I audited those feelings, just like I audited my father's finances. And I realized that what I was feeling wasn't loneliness. It was peace. The silence wasn't empty. It was clean. It was the quiet of a house built on solid rock, with no termites in the walls and no cracks in the basement. My father is sitting in a cell, serving year 3 of 15. My brother is on probation, working minimum wage because his criminal record bars him from the easy life he felt entitled to. My mother lives alone, trapped in the wreckage of the family myth she tried so hard to protect. And I am here, standing in the light of the building I created. I unlocked the front door of the sanctuary. The heavy steel mechanism clicked open with a satisfying, solid sound. I walked inside. The air smelled of fresh paint and new possibilities. You cannot choose the soil you are built on, you cannot choose the people who broke ground on your life, but you can choose to condemn the structure if it is unsafe, you can choose to walk away from the rubble, and if you are strong enough and brave enough, you can choose to build something magnificent in its place. If you've ever had to walk away to save yourself, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone, and you are not selfish. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of survival.